My husband, James, 36, male, and I, 34, female, have been married for almost 7 years now. We met through mutual friends at a barbecue, hit it off immediately, and had what I thought was a solid relationship. He was funny, attentive, and we seemed to want the same things in life. A modest home, maybe a couple of kids down the road, nothing too complicated. We both came from working class backgrounds and shared similar values about money, or so I thought. 3 years into our marriage, the company James worked for downsized. He lost his job as a sales manager. It wasn't his fault. Half the department got laid off, but it hit him hard. He'd been there for 6 years and had built a decent career. I was working as a nurse at the time, and while my salary was okay, it wasn't enough to comfortably cover all our expenses, especially with the mortgage we had just taken on the year before. James job hunted for months, but the market was tough. He'd get to final interviews only to be passed over for someone with more specific experience. His unemployment benefits helped, but they weren't enough. I started picking up extra shifts at the hospital, sometimes working 60 plus hours a week. It was exhausting. But we were a team, and that's what you do when your partner is struggling, right? After about 8 months of searching, James finally found a new job. The pay wasn't great, about 30% less than what he'd been making before, but it was something. We both agreed he should take it while continuing to look for better opportunities. I kept working my extra shifts because we had dipped into our savings during his unemployment and needed to build them back up. We were getting by, but just barely. Every month was a struggle to make ends meet. Then I got an opportunity to take on a weekend position at a nearby urgent care facility. The pay was better than my hospital overtime, so I took it. This meant I was essentially working two jobs, my regular full-time position at the hospital and weekends at urgent care. It was brutal. I was working 6 to 7 days a week, often with 12-hour shifts. I'd come home exhausted, barely able to function, but James was supportive, or seemed to be. He'd have dinner ready when I got home from a late shift, would do laundry, and generally kept the house running while I was working myself to the bone. Last year, things started looking up a bit. James got a modest raise and I was promoted to charge nurse, which came with slightly better pay. We weren't exactly flush with cash, but the constant anxiety about making mortgage payments had eased somewhat. I suggested cutting back on my urgent care hours, but James encouraged me to keep them just a bit longer, he'd say. We're still rebuilding our safety net. That made sense to me, so I kept pushing through the exhaustion. About 4 months ago, I was using James's laptop to order some household supplies because mine was updating. He had left his email open and I accidentally clicked on a message thread from his mother. I wasn't trying to snoop, it was genuinely an accident. But what I saw made my blood run cold. There were dozens of emails thanking James for the money he'd been sending them. Regular transfers, significant amounts. $500 here, $700 there, sometimes even $1,000. His mother talked about using the money for a new car, helping his sister with college tuition, funding a family vacation. The emails went back over 2 years. 2 years. While I was working myself to the point of physical collapse, my husband had been secretly sending thousands of dollars to his family. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I'd met his family several times, his parents, his two sisters, and his brother. They lived about 3 hours away, and while they weren't wealthy, they were comfortable. His dad was retiring from a union job with a pension. His mom worked part-time at a school, and his siblings were all employed. They weren't in dire financial straits by any means. They certainly weren't struggling like we were. I didn't confront James immediately. I needed time to process what I'd discovered, to figure out how to approach him. I checked our joint account statements and couldn't find these transfers, which meant he must have been using a separate account I didn't know about. That hurt almost as much as the deception itself, the deliberate secretiveness of it all. Over the next few weeks, I did some investigating. When James was at work, I searched through his desk and found statements from a separate bank account. The pattern was clear. Every month, sometimes twice a month, he would transfer money to his family members. I added up over $25,000 in the past 2 years. $25,000 while I was working myself to exhaustion, while we were pinching pennies, while I was skipping lunch to save money. I also found credit card statements showing he'd been taking his colleagues out to lunch regularly, buying rounds of drinks after work, even though he told me he was bringing lunch from home to save money. There were purchases from sports memorabilia sites, subscription services I knew nothing about, and other discretionary spending that we supposedly couldn't afford. All while I was working 2 jobs and barely seeing daylight. I still didn't confront him. Instead, I started making my own secret plans. I opened a separate bank account at a different bank and began transferring small amounts from my paychecks into it. Nothing that would raise suspicion, just $100 here, $150 there. I made sure all my personal documents were in order and secured them in a safe deposit box at my new bank. I documented all the evidence of his financial infidelity with photos and screenshots. For 2 months, I acted completely normal. I kept working both jobs, kept pretending I knew nothing about his betrayal. I even listened sympathetically when he would talk about how tight our budget was, nodding along when he suggested we cut back on groceries or put off replacing my worn-out shoes. All the while, my anger and resentment grew. The exhaustion I felt took on a new dimension, not just physical tiredness, but emotional depletion from maintaining this charade. Every time I would come home from a 12-hour shift to find him playing video games or watching sports, knowing he had secretly sent hundreds of dollars to his family that week, I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming. 3 weeks ago, the perfect opportunity presented itself. James mentioned that his company was sending him to a 2-day conference in a neighboring state. He'd be gone overnight, staying at a hotel paid for by his employer. As soon as he left, I put my plan into action. I knew the login information for our joint account because I handled most of the bills. I also had discovered the login for his secret account during my investigation. The joint account had about $4,300 in it, mostly from my recent paychecks. His secret account had nearly $2,800. I transferred every penny from both accounts into my new secret account. I left exactly $1 in each. Then I packed a suitcase with my essential belongings and moved into an Airbnb I had booked for the week. I left a note on the kitchen counter that said only, "I know about the money you've been sending to your family. I know about the secret account. I'll contact you when I'm ready to talk." Then I turned off my phone and took a day off work for the first time in months that wasn't due to complete exhaustion. When I turned my phone back on the next evening, there were dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and texts from James. They started confused and then became increasingly desperate. He'd obviously come home, found me gone, discovered the empty bank accounts, and read my note. His messages ranged from defensive, "My family needed the money, it was my money too," to apologetic, "I'm sorry, I know, I should have told you," to threatening, "What you did is illegal, you can't just take all our money," to pleading, "Please come home, we can work this out." I didn't respond to any of them. I needed time to think, to decide what I wanted to do next. Part of me wanted to end the marriage immediately. The trust was broken, possibly beyond repair. How could I ever believe anything he said about money again? But another part of me remembered the good years, the man I thought I had married, and wondered if there was anything left to salvage. After 3 days of silence, I finally texted him back and agreed to meet at a coffee shop to talk. He was already there when I arrived, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Soon as I sat down, he started apologizing profusely, tears in his eyes, saying he knew what he did was wrong, but his family had always depended on him financially and he didn't know how to stop. He claimed he was afraid to tell me because he thought I wouldn't understand his obligation to help his family. I just listened, letting him talk himself out. He didn't have much to say in his defense. He admitted that his family wasn't in dire need. They simply expected him to help because he always had, even before we were married. His sister's tuition, she could have gotten student loans. His mother's new car, a want, not a need. The family vacation, pure luxury. I told him I hadn't decided yet whether I wanted to continue our marriage. But if there was any chance of that, several things needed to happen immediately. Complete financial transparency, counseling, both individual and couples, and a clear boundary with his family about money. I also told him I would be keeping control of the funds I had transferred for the time being, as I no longer trusted him with our finances. He agreed to everything, seemingly relieved that I was even willing to consider reconciliation. I moved back into our house but slept in the guest room. I transferred enough money back to the joint account to cover our immediate bills, but kept the rest secure in my private account. That was 3 weeks ago, and since then James has started seeing a therapist individually. And we've had 2 sessions with a couples counselor who specializes in financial infidelity. He's shown me all his financial accounts and closed the secret one. He sent a clear message to his family explaining that he would no longer be able to provide regular financial support, which apparently resulted in some angry calls that he fielded without involving me. I've reduced my hours at the urgent care job down to just 1 shift a week. The extra rest has been incredible. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like not to be constantly exhausted. I'm still cautious, still hurt, still processing the betrayal, but I'm trying to keep an open mind about our future. Yesterday, though, something happened that made me question everything again. I discovered that James had opened another email account I knew nothing about. He'd been using it to communicate with his family, and while I couldn't access the messages themselves, the fact that he had created yet another secret just weeks after promising complete transparency felt like a fresh betrayal. When confronted, he claimed it was because his family was harassing him about the money situation, and he didn't want to stress me out with their dramatics. He offered to show me the emails right then, but I was too upset to look at them. I took a walk to clear my head and haven't really discussed it with him since. I don't know what to do now. Part of me thinks I should just file for divorce and be done with this whole mess. Another part wonders if I'm overreacting to what might be a legitimate attempt to shield me from unnecessary stress. The counselor says rebuilding trust takes time and there will be setbacks, but I don't know if I have the energy for this uphill battle. Am I wasting my time trying to salvage this marriage? Is financial infidelity something that can be overcome? Was I wrong to take all the money from our accounts as a wake-up call? Or did he deserve it after what he put me through? I'm lost and could use some outside perspectives. Update 1. It's been 2 days since my original post and I'm still trying to process the hundreds of comments and messages I've received. Thank you to everyone who took time to share advice, similar experiences, or just words of support. It's meant more than you know to feel less alone in this situation. A lot has happened in the past 48 hours. The morning after I posted, I decided to take many of your suggestions and consult with a lawyer about my options. I found a family law attorney who could see me on short notice and spent about an hour explaining the situation. The consultation was eye-opening. According to the lawyer, what I did with the bank accounts exists in a legal grey area. Since they were joint accounts, I technically had the right to withdraw the funds. But if we proceed to divorce, a judge might not look favorably on the action, depending on various factors. She advised me to keep detailed records of all financial transactions from this point forward, and to be prepared to account for how the money was spent. The lawyer also explained that in our state, financial infidelity isn't explicitly grounds for divorce, but could be considered in the overall division of assets if we can prove it represented a significant breach of marital duty. She suggested gathering even more documentation of the secret transfers and hidden spending. After the legal consultation, I felt clearer about my position and decided to have another conversation with James. I asked to see the emails in the secret account he'd created, and he unlocked his phone and handed it to me without hesitation. The emails were mostly what he claimed: his mother and sister sending increasingly desperate, guilt-trippy messages about how they were counting on his financial support, how he was abandoning the family, how they might have to sell their house, which seemed extremely unlikely given their financial situation. His responses were firm but not unkind, repeatedly explaining that he had been dishonest with me and was working to rebuild our marriage, which meant establishing better financial boundaries. What struck me most was that in these emails, James actually stood up for me in ways he never had before. He told his family I had been working myself to exhaustion while he secretly diverted our funds, and that their demands had contributed to serious damage to our marriage. He even wrote, "I almost lost my wife because I was trying to please everyone else at her expense, and I won't make that mistake again." It was the first time since this whole ordeal began that I felt like he truly understood the magnitude of his betrayal. I still wish he had told me about these communications rather than creating a secret email, but seeing the content did ease my mind somewhat. Later that evening, we had our third session with the couple's counselor. With my permission, James shared about the secret email account and how my discovery of it had affected our fragile progress. The counselor facilitated a productive conversation about transparency versus privacy, and we established some clearer guidelines about communication going forward. One breakthrough moment came when James articulated something he hadn't fully expressed before, that his relationship with money was deeply influenced by his family dynamics growing up. Apparently, his father had always maintained strict control over the family finances, often making his mother beg for household expenses. James had vowed never to be that kind of husband, which ironically led him to overcompensate by secretly giving money away rather than having difficult conversations about financial priorities. It doesn't excuse what he did, but it helps me understand the psychological underpinnings a bit better. The counselor suggested that James explore this more deeply in his individual therapy. We're still sleeping in separate bedrooms. and I'm still keeping most of our funds in my private account, transferring money for bills as needed. But we've established a timeline for gradually rebuilding financial integration, contingent on continued progress in therapy and consistent transparency. Yesterday, I reduced my hours at the hospital to a standard 40-hour work week and gave notice at the urgent care that I'll be leaving entirely at the end of the month. James fully supported this decision and has started looking for ways to increase his own income to make up the difference. He's applied for a few better paying positions and has even mentioned possibly taking on some freelance work in his field. I'm still cautious, still wounded, but for the first time in weeks, I feel like we might have a path forward. The trust isn't rebuilt overnight, and I have moments of doubt and anger that hit me out of nowhere, but I'm trying to take it one day at a time. One thing that has become clear to me through all of this, regardless of whether my marriage survives, I will never again sacrifice my health and well-being to the extent I did these past few years. I let myself become depleted in every sense, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all while someone I trusted was making decisions that extended my suffering. Never again. Thank you all again for your support. I'll update when there are significant developments. Update 2. It's been 3 days since my last update and things have taken an unexpected turn that I'm still trying to process. The day before yesterday, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a woman introduced herself as James's sister Kelly. She said she had gotten my number from his phone during a recent family visit I wasn't aware of. My heart immediately started racing. James hadn't mentioned visiting his family, which seemed like exactly the kind of thing he should be transparent about, given our current situation. Kelly launched into what sounded like a prepared speech about family loyalty and obligation. She told me I had no right to dictate who James could support financially, and that I was being selfish for making him choose between his wife and his family. She even had the audacity to say that she might not be able to finish her degree program without James's continued support, as if that was somehow my problem to solve. I remained calm and told her that the financial decisions in our marriage were between James and me, and that while I appreciated her concern, this wasn't an appropriate conversation to have without James present. She became increasingly agitated, eventually saying that James had only married me for my income potential as a nurse, and that their mother had warned him I seemed too independent from the beginning. Then she hung up. I was shaking with anger by the end of the call, not just at Kelly, but at the implication that James had recently visited his family without telling me, potentially discussing our private marital issues with them. This felt like yet another breach of trust when we were supposedly working on rebuilding it. When James got home from work, I immediately asked him about the family visit. He looked genuinely confused and denied visiting his family recently. I told him about Kelly's call, recounting the conversation in detail. His face went through a series of emotions: shock, anger, embarrassment. After a moment of stunned silence, he called his mother on speakerphone right in front of me. It quickly became clear that Kelly had not seen James in person. She had been complaining to their mother about not being able to afford some school expense, and their mother had suggested she call me directly to woman, explain their side of things. His mother sounded embarrassed when James confronted her about this recommendation, but didn't exactly apologize. James firmly told his mother that any communication about our financial situation needed to go through him, not me, and that Kelly's call was completely inappropriate. He ended by saying he needed to take a break from family communication for a while to focus on our marriage, and hung up despite his mother's protests. I was relieved that James hadn't been secretly visiting his family. But the entire situation underscored just how enmeshed he was with them financially and emotionally. Even now, they felt entitled to our money and comfortable enough to harass me directly when they weren't getting what they wanted. After the call, James and I had a long, raw conversation about family boundaries. For the first time, he admitted that his family's expectations had always felt oppressive to him, but he had never known how to set proper limits. He confessed that he had often felt like the responsible third parent in his family, even as a teenager, and that the role had followed him into adulthood. The next day, James came home from work with a surprising announcement. He had been offered a position at a competing company with a 20% higher salary and better benefits. He had applied weeks ago, but hadn't mentioned it because he didn't want to get my hopes up. The new job would start in a month, and while it would mean a slightly longer commute, the financial improvement would be significant. Under normal circumstances, this would be cause for celebration. But in light of everything that had happened, I found myself questioning the timing and whether there were details about this job offer that he wasn't sharing. Was this real, or was it just something he was saying to appease me? My doubt must have shown on my face because James immediately pulled up the offer letter on his email and handed me his phone. It was legitimate. The company was reputable, the offer substantial, and the start date exactly as he'd said. He had even forwarded the offer to our financial counselor earlier that day. I felt ashamed of my suspicion, but James said he understood why I would question things after everything that had happened. He said rebuilding trust would take time, and he was prepared for that. Yesterday, we had another session with our couples counselor where we discussed the incident with his sister and the job offer. The counselor suggested that James might benefit from some family therapy sessions with his parents and siblings separate from our couples work. She also recommended that we develop a written financial plan together. Not just a budget, but a comprehensive document outlining our financial values, goals, and boundaries. We spent last evening starting that document, discussing uncomfortable topics like whether we would ever provide financial support to either of our families in the future, and under what circumstances, how we would make decisions about major purchases, and what financial transparency would look like going forward. It was difficult but productive. This morning, though, I discovered something that has thrown me into turmoil again. While looking for a document in our home office, I found a credit card statement for an account I didn't know existed. It showed recent charges for jewelry from a high-end store, a purchase made just days ago. The amount was substantial, over $1,200. I haven't confronted James about this yet. Part of me wonders if it could be an innocent explanation. Perhaps a gift for me, though my birthday isn't for months. But after everything that's happened, it's hard not to assume the worst. Is this yet another secret account? More hidden spending, or something else entirely? I feel like every time I start to rebuild some trust, something new emerges to shatter it again. I'm exhausted by the emotional roller coaster. I had planned to transfer more of our money back to the joint account this week as a show of good faith, but now I'm hesitating. I'm starting to wonder if I'm being naive in trying to save this marriage. Maybe some betrayals are just too fundamental to overcome. Update 3. It's been just over 2 days since my last update, and I hardly know where to begin. Past 48 hours have been some of the most emotionally intense of my life. After finding the credit card statement showing the jewelry purchase, I spent several hours in a state of anxious uncertainty. I considered confronting James immediately, but decided to wait and observe. Our financial counselor had emphasized the importance of communication rather than accusation, so I wanted to approach the situation carefully. That evening, James seemed unusually nervous during dinner. He kept checking his phone and seemed distracted. My suspicions grew. Was he communicating with someone about the jewelry? Had he bought it for someone else? My mind went to dark places, wondering if financial infidelity had perhaps been accompanied by actual infidelity. After dinner, he said he needed to talk to me and asked if we could sit in the living room. My heart was pounding as I prepared myself for whatever confession was coming. But what happened next completely blindsided me. James pulled a small wrap box from his pocket and placed it on the coffee table between us. He told me that he had been doing a lot of reflection on our marriage and what had gone wrong. He said that while nothing could excuse his deception, he had realized that somewhere along the way he had stopped seeing me as his partner and started seeing me as a resource, someone who could work harder, earn more, sacrifice more, so that he could avoid difficult conversations with his family and maintain his image as the reliable provider. He apologized, not just for the secret accounts and hidden spending, but for taking advantage of my work ethic and dedication. He said he had watched me exhaust myself for years without truly acknowledging the toll it was taking, because acknowledging it would have meant confronting his own role in making our financial situation so precarious. Then he pushed the box towards me and asked me to open it. Inside was a beautiful pendant necklace, nothing flashy, but elegant and clearly of good quality. He explained that it was an anniversary gift, not for our wedding anniversary, which is months away, but to mark 1 month since I had discovered his financial deception and forced him to confront the damage he had done to our marriage. He said that it had been the worst month of his life, but also the most important. You could have just left and no one would have blamed you. Instead, you gave me a chance to understand what I've done and try to make it right. I don't know if we'll make it through this, but I want you to have this as a reminder that I see you now, really see you, and I'm committed to being worthy of your trust again, however long that takes. I was speechless. The gesture was simultaneously touching and troubling. After all, spending over $1,000 on jewelry wasn't exactly demonstrating financial responsibility. When I pointed this out, James showed me the receipt and explained that he had actually sold his expensive watch collection, a hobby I had always found a bit excessive, to pay for the necklace. The credit card had just been used for the initial purchase until the watch sale was completed the next day, at which point he paid off the balance in full. He'd kept the transaction from our joint expenses, using money from selling his personal items because he wanted it to represent his own sacrifice rather than drawing from our shared resources. He admitted that keeping it secret, even with good intentions, was probably a mistake given our current trust issues, but he had wanted it to be a surprise. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me was moved by the gesture and explanation, while another part remained wary of anything secretive, regardless of the intention. I also got to know about a better job position at work, and I accepted it on the spot. When I told James that evening, he was genuinely happy for me, immediately starting to brainstorm ways we could adjust our routine to make the transition easier. For the first time in ages, we were talking about our futures with hope rather than anxiety. Yesterday, we had another session with our financial counselor. We brought our completed financial plan document, which detailed our income, expenses, saving goals, and agreements about transparency and decision making. The counselor reviewed it and seemed impressed with our progress, but cautious that documents and promises are just the beginning. The real work would be in consistent implementation over time. We also discussed the jewelry purchase, with James acknowledging that surprising me with an expensive gift, even with the best intentions, wasn't the right move given our current trust rebuilding process. The counselor helped us establish some guidelines for gift giving and discretionary spending going forward that would allow for occasional surprises without secrecy around finances. Last night, for the first time since I discovered his deception, I moved back into our bedroom. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. We're still taking things slowly in rebuilding our physical intimacy, but it felt like an important step in acknowledging the progress we've made. This morning, I transferred most of the remaining money from my secret account back to our joint account, keeping only a small emergency fund for myself, something the counselor had actually recommended for both of us to maintain. James has been completely transparent with his finances, closing all secret accounts and adding me as an authorized user on his remaining credit card so I can view all transactions. As for his family, they've been suspiciously quiet since the incident with his sister. James sent them a detailed email explaining that while he loves them, his marriage needs to be his priority right now, and any financial assistance in future would need to be discussed and agreed upon by both of us. He also made it clear that any attempts to contact me directly about money would result in him cutting communication temporarily. I don't know what the future holds for us. There are still moments when the hurt and betrayal feel overwhelming, when I question whether I can ever fully trust him again. Trust isn't rebuilt in a month, no matter how sincere the apologies or significant the changes. But for the first time since this all began, I can envision a path forward that doesn't end in divorce. I want to thank everyone who commented on my previous posts with advice, support, and personal stories. You helped me feel less alone in navigating this complicated situation. While I may not update again unless something significant changes, know that your words made a difference during one of the most difficult periods of my life. For anyone going through something similar, I don't have any perfect answers. Every relationship is different, and what constitutes an unforgivable breach of trust varies from person to person. All I can say is, trust your instincts, seek professional guidance, both legal and therapeutic, and remember that whatever you decide, whether to stay and rebuild or leave and start fresh, you deserve financial security and honest partnership. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.